Hi, my name is Susan Trammell, and I'm a professor in the Department of Physics and Optical Science at UNC Charlotte. And I'm going to be leading my fifth seminar for CTI this year, Understanding the Science of Light, a hands-on approach to teaching and learning science. And so as the title implies, that hands-on approach, we're going to be doing lots of experiments ourselves throughout the seminar to try to understand light. And then we will adapt some of those experiments so that you can use them in your classrooms. So what are we going to be talking about in this seminar? Well, we're going to start with just trying to get a basic understanding of the phenomena we call light. And we'll start out by talking about light as a wave. We'll introduce the idea of color and wavelength and frequency, and we can talk about the speed of light. And then we're going to talk about an alternate way of thinking about light, and that is light as a particle. And we'll try to understand what we mean by a photon and how light carries energy. Then we're going to talk about how light interacts with matter. And this is probably going to be the most important part for us as we think about light in our everyday lives. And so we're going to talk about phenomenon that you've heard about before, but we're going to talk a little bit more about reflection. And I show you a picture here of Mirror Lake, and you can see the mountain reflected on that smooth surface of the lake. I'll talk about how that works. We're going to talk about refraction. Here I show you a prism with white light going in and a rainbow coming out of this glass prism, and we'll understand how that works. We're going to talk about how different materials absorb light, and then we can also talk about how different materials might give off light. And these are all going to be important as we understand light in our everyday lives. And so we'll figure out exactly what we want to talk about as a group. I always like to hear what fellows are interested in, and we'll kind of craft the different subjects we're going to talk about during our seminar based on what people's interest might be. But here are just some examples just to get you thinking. We can talk about light as an everyday phenomenon. We can talk about rainbows and soap bubbles. Why do we see those colors that we see? Can we explain that? We can talk about this phenomenon that I'm showing in the bottom left-hand part of the slide, and that's called a moon dog. See a circle around the moon. What causes that? My grandmother used to always say that meant it was going to snow. And then you can see over here on the right, two pictures that show this idea of a mirage. One is this road looking shiny in the distance. And then I really like this other one. It's called the flying ship. And it looks like this ship is actually levitating above the surface of the ocean. And these are all different. That's kind of an optical illusion. And we'll see if we can figure out how that works. Then we could talk about our most important light source here on Earth, and that's the sun. And we could talk about things like how we harvest energy from the sun using solar panels, how those work. Can talk a little bit about photosynthesis and how maybe the wavelength of light is important for different reactions in photosynthesis. We could talk about the greenhouse effect. And we could also talk about how different surfaces on Earth reflect light differently, and that can have an impact on global temperatures. For example, how much light is reflected from snow and ice versus the surface of the ocean. We're also going to talk about light as a tool, and that can be in our everyday lives or in science. A couple of examples of science are microscopes and telescopes, how those work and what we study with those different instruments. And we can also talk about things like the laser scanner that you encounter at the grocery store, how that works. And we can talk about fiber optics, which you see in the lower left of this slide. That's really important for understanding our high-speed internet that we all rely on these days. And then we could also talk about things like, if you see in the lower right part of this slide, lasers and medicine and how using lasers has improved treatment. And then we can also talk about beyond the visible spectrum. That is light we can't see with our eyes, but is really important. And that could be talking about X-rays and how those work, why X-rays can go through your tissue and other wavelengths can't. Could talk about cell phones and how those work. And then we could also talk about microwave ovens. Those are using light too to cook our food. How does that work? And then if you see here in the lower right-hand part, we could talk about infrared cameras. You probably heard of night vision goggles, and try to understand how those kinds of things work and what we mean by infrared light. So I hope you join me for this seminar this year. I'm excited to be teaching again. So come and learn more about light with me and our seminar. Thanks.